Well, hello again. It's what is it? It's a Church Solutions podcast. That's what it is. And my name is Phil Thompson.
And I'm Steve Lacy.
And I think
I'm
it's
Mike Gray.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mike. I cut you off.
All right. It's all right. I can go walk the dog if you'd prefer.
No. By all means, we want you here. Or you could put the dog on camera. That would be fun too. Which one? You have like 3 dogs, right?
Yes, I do.
Okay, good for you. So I remember those days. Episode 328, I think, is what we are here. I'm not keeping score, but close to that. And it's good to be with everybody today. This podcast is brought to you by 4 Steps to Leverage Your Live Stream for Ministry Growth. And that is, that is a webinar that we're going to be doing March 15th. 12 Eastern time. It is a free webinar, 4 Steps to Leverage Your Live Stream for Ministry Growth. Mike and I will be hosting it. And this is, if you've been listening to the podcast the last few weeks or so, excuse me, I feel like Joe Biden here. If you've been listening to the podcast the last few weeks or so, you know we've been touching on some of the things that we're going to talk about in the webinar. Today, though, is not the case. Today, we're going to talk about the future church. Talk among yourselves. I didn't bring any water in here.
Of course. The future church. Well,
Future church.
I know we all think about what that looks like. What would the church look like in the future? I think we might not recognize it sometimes.
I had this discussion, just not my in-laws, but my son's in-laws were in town, and they were asking about, streaming church and that sort of thing. And I kind of talked about it as though one of the girls there, young girl, she talked about how the work environment has changed. And I think the church environment has changed too. We've kind of gone through a cultural shift with both work, and I think church is the same kind of thing. We're much more used to staying home, working remote, viewing church online. So it's put a big shift in the culture and kind of changed people's expectations of what church is now that we're on the other side of the pandemic, or coming down the other side of the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. The culture is changing. The culture has always been changing. It's been changing over the last probably 10, 20 years, but the pandemic certainly has made some more changes. So I thought we would talk today a little bit about the future of the church, and nobody has a crystal ball here, but there are some stats here that Tony Morgan, our good friend Tony Morgan, who won't talk to me, he's the founder and lead strategist of
the Unstuck Group.
The Unstuck, yeah. My notes here didn't print that out. The Unstuck Group, really good guy, and he goes around. He's a consultant and he helps churches. And here's some stats that he brought up recently. This is pandemic stats over the last quarter. Is that right, Steve? You looked at this. I can't remember. My mind went.
It was March 21 till today, I believe.
Okay, all right. So
when the interviews went on, yeah.
Okay, good. So here's some interesting stats. The average in-person attendance over the past 12 months dropped by 30%. This includes total of all people, including children. There was a 17% increase in the number of new people that churches started to track in their database over the last year compared to the year before, whatever that means. The average number of online views per week. Go ahead.
Whatever that means. That means that as they added new people into their systems for, either membership or keeping up with or part of the family, they've got more names in the system last year over the past 12 months, 17% more than they did in years prior.
What do you think that is?
I think it's going to fold into the last stat you're going to talk about, but while people are staying away from in-person attendance, their online attendance has gone through the roof. So those are still people coming to your church that they're adding into their systems. That's my theory. What do you think, Mike?
Mike, your thoughts?
I think it's partially. I think you take the first stat of 30 and subtract the 17, folks took the opportunity to change churches. A lot of folks took the opportunity to change churches. But the other percentage is, as you said, Steve, taken up by more than that margin of people who watch online now. So the dynamic has changed, and it's part of our webinar that's coming up soon. We're going to be talking about, in this new dynamic, what's this look like? How does this work now that this big chunk of folks are at home with their slippers on?
Yeah. So Phil, let's finish your stats list. So the online attendance has gone up more than 150%.
That's correct, Steve.
Yeah. So that is crazy numbers from the years prior.
Right.
That's surprising to me, but I can see 50%, but 150%.
Yeah, limited sample here, but and then the last thing I put in the notes here, and by the way, this will be online at our blog, blog.streamingchurch.tv. This will be on this week. But the last stat I threw in here was churches reported on an average that their total general fund giving was down 1.6% from the previous year. So that's not really, it's significant, but it's not terrible, right?
Yeah. So kind of summarizing, 30% are not coming anymore, or coming in person. But they've added 17% more people to their church. Database. And then the average online was over 100% up, and the giving was pretty much unchanged, less than 2%.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So
I think that's a huge opportunity, though, because as you guys have traveled around the internet, the interwebs, you, like I, have seen how less than optimal the giving experience is online for most organizations. So there is some huge potential to make it easy for people to contribute to a mission that they feel invested in, and take that number and really make a huge difference for folks at home.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I put down 5 points here that we should consider as a church. I'm talking general speaking, and they're not all tech. They're not all tech stuff. And actually there's a lot more, but I did, for the sake of time and this article, I didn't put them all down here, but I thought we would cover a few of these points here on the Church Solutions podcast. So let's jump in. The first one is very obvious, at least to us. Real interaction with real people online is real. it's real. And I know there's been pushback in the years past about, well, those online people, they don't really count. But the truth is they do count. And if you've spent any amount of time online with people and really developed something with them, in fact, I have found that sometimes people online will get a little bit deeper with you than they might in person to person. I don't know why that is. I guess because they're not face to face. So they might share things with you that they might not share face to face, if that makes any sense. Introverts can kind of be that way. So real people, real interaction with real people online is real. And of course, the key word here is interaction.
Well, and real. So there's a big caution here, in that, and I'm speaking for myself. I won't put this on everyone, but I know this about churches. While the desire is to be extremely relational, sometimes digital tools are allowed to replace real relationship. Me sending you a newsletter is not a relationship. That's some information that we can engage about. But the real relationship parts, I am absolutely confident that the churches that are going to be greatly successful in the future are those that learn how to use digital tools to be really authentically relational with people.
I agree 100%.
So as I'm trying to read between the lines of, we talked about the stats and what's going on right now with people. And I'm thinking that, the in-person dropped by 30%, and that 30% is probably part of the jump in the online people attending, more, as well as, Mike, you talked about people are switching churches. And so there's this element of making this interaction real with the real people. Those that aren't coming to church still need that interaction. So there's those that are probably still committed to your church that need that real interaction. And then there's a large number of people that are kind of the outer circle of the church, I think, that are checking you out online or been a few times. And the more interaction that you can have with those folks, the greater chances you're going to be able to draw them, towards the core.
Yeah,
with the societal norm being isolation. So
yeah,
if I'm no longer going into work and seeing people there, and I'm not going to church and seeing people there, I become extremely isolated. Therefore, I'm very hungry for some kind of relationship. I need, and we know this now. I mean, it's proven. Depression is so high, and all of the things in that dynamic are caused because of isolation. So we're here. We have the tools to bridge that gap.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking on this podcast about Church of the Future, and we were talking about the culture and how we need to be willing to change, maybe not change our mission. In fact, we probably should not change our mission, but we change our means on how we fulfill our mission. And Mike, you had brought something up right before we recorded this. The mission is sacred, but how did I put that in the notes? I don't have it here in front of me. The mission is sacred. The message doesn't change, but the method changes.
Right.
So the message is sacred. I've got my act together today, don't I? The message is sacred, but the method sometimes has to change. And then you were talking, which I thought was a good point. You were talking about some people are confused on what's sacred. What's sacred may not really be sacred.
Yeah.
I don't know, at least biblically speaking.
Or there's things that are sacred to me that are not actually sacred. So I have my own sacred cows, right?
That's for sure, no doubt.
The way you do worship is like this. The way you do church is like this, right. And that's not necessarily sacred.
We fell into how we do. If you're in a live experience, you have an announcer, and then you have this many songs, and then you have this, and then you have this. And if it's not in that order, and you don't do it exactly that way, then it's not right. Well, that's a method. That is not sacred. It's a habit that you're comfortable with. That's a sacred cow. Right. That is not the sacred part of how we worship.
And sacred cows make really good hamburger meat. So,
great hamburgers.
Yeah, that's how I stole that from Kevin Lehman. All right, so I guess I just want to clarify that here, as we get off track here, but let's jump onto the second point here. But that was good. What you guys just shared was excellent. So the second point is technology is here to stay. And look, I know there's probably a lot of us listening to this podcast going, well, duh, of course it is. But one of the things I wanted to bring up here is we've always had technology. We've always had it. I mean, from people in the first humans walking around developed tools, so that they could, clean fish or whatever, they developed things over the years. Humans have always had technology. Many times we think of technology as, technology, the computers and electronics and all that, but that's just one part of technology. The printing press, I would consider technology, which, changed the world. And so there's lots of things that have come along over the years that are technology, and it's here to stay. And this phase of technology that we're in right now is here to stay. It's not
Right.
going anywhere.
I think Mike's point about sacred cows, I think technology is threatening to a lot of the church that may hold up
Yeah.
some sacred cows. So the church typically tends to be a laggard when it comes to technology.
Yeah.
They're waiting for the masses to completely embrace it, and then we'll look at this thing. It's not as evil as we thought it was when we first heard about that mobile phone, or whatever the technology was. The church tends to lag, and we're just emphasizing technology here to stay. You should embrace it and see how to best use it.
Yeah. And a point that I got my points out of order here, but I'm going to jump ahead here to another point, which I think ties in with what we're just saying. And that is with technology, I think comes some experimentation. And so I think we need to value experimentation. If we want to reach this culture, if this church wants to, when I say this church, I'm talking generally speaking, if the church wants to really change course as far as instead of losing people, which we have the last 20 or 30 years, but begin to reach people more effectively, we need to value experimentation. So, connecting with our community, with technology, connecting in other areas, not just technology, but the courage to try things, to try something new, to try something different, give it a little bit of time. And, if it doesn't work, and, throw it in the garbage can and move on to something else.
Right. And you want to value. Go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead, Steve. No, go ahead.
I was just saying, you want to manage your risk as you do your experimentation. You don't want to bet the farm on, one big experiment and go all in, and that would, really hurt the church if it didn't work out well, because the experiments are supposed to prove whether something worked or didn't work. And so there's most things aren't going to work. So there's a risk with doing things. You just want to manage that risk and make sure that you're not betting the farm on something while you're experimenting, but you do want to experiment.
Yes. Yeah. I don't think you can effectively grow if you don't try experiment with new. I don't want to jump too far, but if you don't have any context of where you're going, and I think Steve's right, you're like, we think that only thing that's ever going to matter to churches anymore is Zoom meetings. We're gonna abandon the website, and we're gonna abandon social media and everything else. Zoom's it. We're gonna invest in everything in Zoom, and suddenly that doesn't pan out, and you're in a jam. I mean, you no longer have an outside impression. Anyway, all of that to say, manage and review. When you fail, don't just run away from it. Say, what failed? Why did it fail? How could we have done it better? Or
it's a learning opportunity.
Hey, that was awesome. We tried something and it didn't work. Now we've ruled out one thing.
Yeah.
Let's find the next one. And then eventually you're going to land on some brilliant ideas that are revolutionary and change everything.
Yeah, absolutely. We started when I was at the church you guys go to now, is on staff at a live church in Tucson. We decided we were going to try a Northwest campus in the 90s. And so we did that. And it was an experiment that, and I don't think it failed. I mean, we did it for a while and then we discontinued it, but there was a lot of good things that came out of it.
Oh yeah.
A lot of people that we connected with who, I don't know if they're still with the church today, but they were for many, many years. And it was a good experience. It was a learning experience, but it was a positive experience. And so sometimes an experiment that people might say, well, that failed. You don't have a Northwest campus. Well, it wasn't a failure. It was a good experiment that we learned a lot from it. And actually, Alive is on the Northwest side now, where before it wasn't, so.
One of the things that's been chief in that, it was time management during a service.
Yeah.
Back then, the pastor was traveling from one campus to the other.
Yes.
So there was some very critical time management between when bands started and bands ended. And I see that today at Alive. They're down.
Yeah.
They take their time management very serious now.
Yeah.
Well, that also came from multi-site and campuses, and
Yes.
that was another later experiment that eventually planted some other churches. Awesome, way to go, multiplication. And we just say, okay, well, it didn't work out exactly like we thought it was going to work out, but it worked out for the kingdom. It worked out, and that's a win from something that we tried that taught us something new. But we wouldn't have been able to do multi-site, I don't think, Phil, had we not done that early Northwest campus, because that taught us how to do church mobile and what's involved in setting up and tearing down and so on and so forth. So then you move to a school and you set up and tear down every week. And then, oh, I hated those days. That trailer, I hated that trailer. Anyway, moving on. And then just continue to grow with new things that you're trying. And sometimes they turn into something really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So we need to always be open to experimentation if we're going to reach this culture. And then the other thing too, I think is as a church, and I'm talking again, I'm speaking general here. Part of the wonderful thing about technology is it gives you the ability to look outside your walls much easier. I mean, it's just much easier to look outside your walls. And so that's one of my points here is that, I was part of churches years ago in the 70s and even the 80s that really were very inward. They focused inward and they focused on the people they had. And I understand why we did that. We wanted to shepherd people. We wanted people to grow. We wanted to disciple people. But there was too much of an emphasis, in my opinion, on the inside and very little on the outside of the walls. And so I think a healthy church, especially if you're trying to reach this culture, if you can do some of these things we just talked about and look outside a little bit and develop a passion for people that are not necessarily inside the building, but those outside, and you can count online people perhaps as being outside, but even your communities, people that don't even know about you yet. That to me is a very important part of helping the church reach this culture. And you guys have heard this before. I don't know who said it, but if your church were to shut down today, would anybody in the community really notice? And I'm talking about people that don't go to your church. If your church were to shut down, would anybody notice it? And would it have an effect on the community? If it doesn't have an effect on the community, then something needs to change in your church so that you can at least reach your people and reach people outside of the walls. That was the point I was trying to make here in this article.
I think there's another piece to this. This is my thinking. I won't say necessarily. I think if you're the leader of a church, you really have to push this. In fact, I would push my people. If I were you, I would push my people and I would lead by example by being involved outside the church doors in the community in some way. Because if you don't have enough perspective to know properly how to use technology to reach them. If you don't know who they are and you don't have a relationship with them, you don't have the right or correct perspective to know when the greatest opportunity that's ever been landed in your lap is the right opportunity, or it's a mistake, or the risk is too high. I just don't think you can make those decisions without the information you need gathered from the outside.
I think so.
Exactly.
Yeah. Go ahead, Stephen.
I listened to a lot of other podcasts, and there was a good example of a church that was in the same town as a prison, and the prison ward came to the pastor of the church and said, "Will you teach Bible class at my prison?" And he's like, "Yeah." And his wife got involved, and just an incredible ministry, just going into the prison and teaching classes. So that was a good example, in my opinion, of reaching out to the community and having that community had a prison nearby. It just impacted the lives of countless numbers of people
That's a good
within
point.
the prison system. This
Yeah.
whole podcast was just talking about how effective their ministry was.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's kind of how I broke my teeth in when it came to speaking. I was a chaplain at the Pima County Jail for almost 20 years. And it was a wonderful experience. I remember when I helped start a church in Kansas, of all places, there's this little town that about 16,000 very ethnic people. It was by Fort Riley Army Base, Junction City, Kansas, and people from Black, white, Asian, the whole thing there because of the Army base. But we got involved. Junction City, Kansas would have this big 4th of July parade. And if you know anything about Midwestern towns, and I know, Mike, you're from kind of the Oklahoma area, Texas, those little parades are a big deal for the community. And this was even probably a bigger deal because it was by the Army base, 16,000. And there's a lot of little towns around Junction City. We got involved as a church. We got involved in putting that on, helping the city of Junction City put that on. And we actually brought in Christian artists and had concerts during that 4th of July celebration. It went on for like 3 days or something, I was really proud of that. I really felt like, we're doing what we're supposed to do, try to reach our community and think outside the walls. All right, so we're running out of time here. Some food for thought here. We would love to get your feedback, folks. I see your dog's giving us some feedback now, Mike, but I would love to get your feedback on what you think about this. You can read about it later at blog.streamingchurch.tv. I want to remind you that you can sign up for our free webinar, 4 Easy Steps to Leverage Your Live Stream for Ministry Growth. We talk about some of this stuff as well as the things we've mentioned the last few weeks or so on the Church Solutions podcast. Just go to webinar.streamingchurch.tv. It's March 15th. It's free. It's 12 noon Eastern time, and it'll be about a half hour long. Mike and I will be hosting it. We'll have some questions and answers, but if you do live streaming, or if you're thinking about doing streaming video, I'm not sure why you wouldn't be doing it by now, but if you're not and you are thinking about it, and I know there are churches that are thinking about it. I just talked to somebody yesterday. So check it out. Webinar.streamingchurch.tv, 4 easy steps to leverage your live stream for ministry growth. And with that in mind, I will finish up the podcast. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time today.
Glad to be here.
Thank you, Michael. You're muted because your dog was taking over. All right. He's nodding his head if you can watch us on video here. Appreciate both these guys. And most of all, we appreciate you listening to the Church Solutions podcast. Please take care of yourselves and each other. We'll catch you again next time on another edition of the Church Solutions podcast. I'm Phil Thompson.